Greetings, folks, and welcome to the Electromaker podcast. This is your audio midweek roundup of all things Maker and Embedded and Lovely, and today is a very special episode because today is the 100th episode of the Electromaker Show. It is hard to believe that 100 episodes ago we were in the middle of a pandemic and in lockdown, fully quarantined, and just starting this show as a sort of idea. The basic idea for the show came from Rich, who was the managing editor of Electromaker then and still is to this day. But the brief was actually quite vague, just make a show about cool projects. There's loads of cool projects on the Electromaker site, for example. You could use those. New products as they come out, and maybe some stuff from funding websites. Just around about 20 minutes of just chatter and see if it is a show that is viable. And that was kind of it. Since then, that's pretty much what I've done almost every week since then. There have obviously been some gaps, as you will know if you're a regular listener. So, today's show is a bit of a retrospective. It's looking back on the things we talked about over the years the Electromaker Show has been going and how it's changed. Because while the theme of the show stays more or less the same most of the time, Electromaker itself has branched out into doing all kinds of contests and giveaways. And we've also physically met up and gone to places. Myself and Rich, the aforementioned manager of the Electromaker and the editor, lives in the UK. I live in Berlin, Germany. And so actually being able to physically meet up and go to conferences together and film stuff on the conference floor was something that I never thought we'd be doing, and I'm very glad that we are. So with all that said, yes, I hope you enjoyed this retrospective. It is probably a quite visual medium in that we are looking back literally at old shows on the Electromaker YouTube channel. So there may be some bits where I do actually say, hey, look at how weird the set looked on Electromaker, and there's not really any way I can describe that to you in audio format. So this is one of those ones where maybe if something really doesn't make sense, it might be worth going to the relevant timestamp in the YouTube video if you would like to get context. Other than that, the usual stuff. Just thank you so much for all of your support. We do not have sponsored podcasts. We don't do adverts. We do have a shop at electromaker.io that you could take a look at if you want to support us. But that is that, I think, for the introduction. Yes, thank you all so much for listening for the last 100 episodes. And let's get on with the show. So, way back in 2020, I recorded the very first Electromaker Show standing in front of that wall back there, which is the same wall, it just has a lot more stuff. It's incredible how empty this room looked when I look back at footage from back then. The brief was kind of simple. There was a couple of other folks that work at Electromaker who've been taking care of all the editorial and shop side of stuff, and they said, come up with a show where we talk about cool stuff on the internet, like projects and maybe some stuff from funding websites. And they told me about crowd supply, which is something that I didn't really know about before I started the show. And they said, just general maker news and cool stuff from the week. And the thing that amazes me is that even this very first episode had kind of the blueprint for how this show would remain for the next 100 episodes. One of the things about this show that is sort of amazing is that I talk about the 8GB variant of the Raspberry Pi 4, because the Raspberry Pi 4 came out in 2019. The 8GB variant came out in 2020. And the thing that's amazing is that even though things were very difficult in terms of being a human and seeing other humans, you could still buy a Raspberry Pi 4 8GB variant at this point. Little did we know how much that was about to change. Oh, hi there, helicopter. I wonder how many helicopters people have heard in the background of the Electromaker Show over the last... I live, there's a hospital just over there with a helipad, and I record in an attic. So, yeah, 2 and 2, helicopter, low to house noise. Now, perhaps unsurprisingly, given when this show began, and if you wonder why I'm sort of dancing around the words there are certain things that if you still talk about them on YouTube, certain events we all shared, YouTube will make your video disappear for the fear of it being disinformation. So let's just say the odd time we had during the time thing several years ago where we didn't go out much, I featured a bunch of online meetups for the maker community. Because again, one of the things that was very odd about this is that when the original idea for the Electromaker Show came together, I was sort of interested in seeing if I could make it something which would work locally as well. Go to one of the many maker spaces in Berlin and have that as an element of the show. And that had to be very quickly just not done, and it never came back because we weren't seeing each other. However, and there was a bunch of fantastic meetups in this show, and also I noticed when I was reviewing the footage of this show, the H4N Digital Happy Hour, as early as show 1, I am singing the praises of the Baylor team, Baylor.io, who make the wonderful little music-based microcontroller boards based on the BeagleBone with a cape on top of it. I was already talking about how much I love them and how wonderful their online DSP course is, And I stand by that, by the way. I still return to this course to try and brush up my knowledge on certain things. As in the very minimal spare time that I have right now, I have two projects. One is a MCU DAC for controlling a synthesizer, and the other is a purely digital delay pedal, which I'm using Bela for. As early as the first episode, I was singing the praises of Bela, something I have not stopped doing since. Now, projects have been a mainstay of this show from the very get-go, and yes, we feature projects that are on the Electromaker project hub, which you can post there. You just need a free Electromaker account, and people win prizes every month for their projects on Electromaker. We'll talk about that later. But we've also looked at projects from pretty much all over the internet. People's personal blogs, Hackaday, anything that's just cool that I think, okay, other people need to see this, I've talked about. I'm showing you this because I'm also showing that since episode 3 I have given preferential treatments to things that are synthesizer and music based. I've made no secret of my love for microcontroller based music since the very start of this show, and this is no difference from that. This is a Cat's fantastic granular synthesizer, by the way, this show, like any show from the past, I will make sure that there are links to every single one of these projects in the description of this video. If you see something as I'm whipping through that you want to go back and look at, you can find the website address there. This is, yes, a granular synthesizer using Arduino. And this hasn't changed. From then until now, one of the things that has been a mainstay of this show is the fact that there's always far too many amazing projects from the Electromaker community to pick. Each week on the show, there's at least 10 things I'd like to talk about, and I very rarely have the chance to speak about more than maybe one or two, just because of timing. This show is meant to be 20 minutes long. It's almost always nearly 30 minutes long, and in the past I've had shows reaching up to 40 or maybe 50 minutes, because I find it very difficult, as you're hearing now, to keep things brief. But I've said it before and I'll say it again, my favourite part of being a part of Electromaker is this page here. Seeing the projects that other people make, seeing the approaches they take to them and the way that they document them. If you've made something that you are proud of, or if you've made something that was really difficult to get your head around, I think there's no better way of sharing that joy than documenting it, telling other people how you did it, whether it's a quite technical documentation or just you venting your frustration about how hard a project was with a few photos. It's all absolutely welcome here, and I absolutely love reading it all. Right at the top of the page right now is Iran Fiat, who is someone who, if you've been following the show for a while, whose name you might recognize, they've been slowly taking their Atari and making it just do incredible modern things, like using OpenCV to have real ping pong bats to play Atari tennis. And as you're seeing, this is self-driving AI on an Atari 2600. Just mind-bending stuff. Link in the description as always. Now would be the perfect time to mention Electromaker of the Month. We have been giving prizes to people that post projects on our website every month for the last year, and we're going to continue doing it. The idea is very simple. If you have a free Electromaker account, you can post your projects to the Electromaker website. You just go on the project page here and you click upload, under community you click upload project, and we even have a guide as to how you can do that. This blog post here is about Electromaker of the Month. I'll leave it in the description of the video. It has a link down here somewhere as to how you can a guide to uploading your project to Electromaker. We have a panel of judges who are completely separate to me, because otherwise it wouldn't be fun. I don't want to have to pick prize winners. But they pick three projects each month to win prizes. In the past, there's been Nordic semiconductor hardware. In the future, there might be other kind of hardware. But right now, you can win cold hard cash, which I think is a language everyone understands. Right now, if you are the top Electromaker of the month, you will win $150. Second prize is $100, third prize is $50, and everyone wins a tidy packet of swag. You can see the thumbnail just here. This video, by the way, is another video I made that just explains the whole contest. It might be better to just go to the link in the description and read it yourself, because I'm skipping over it right now. But yeah, there's nothing complicated about it. If you upload your project to the site, it's in, and if the judges pick it as first, second, or third, you win money, which is kind of wild. But it's a very cool thing that I get to say, hey, this is something that happens. And I just get to enthuse about projects as normal. But yeah, projects have always been my favorite part of this job, and I really look forward to seeing the kind of stuff that you come up with so I can talk about them in the next 100 episodes. Now, one of the essential building blocks to the Electromaker Show since the start has been funding website things, or as I mysteriously called it in episode 5, and now back to one of our favourite sections, things that are on funding websites currently being funded, apart from the things that haven't started being funded yet on funding websites, and a few things that aren't on funding websites, they're just for sale. Name. Perhaps unsurprisingly, we just shortened it to funding website things. But yeah, there's been some amazing stuff over the years. And one of the earlier ones that I thought was a really interesting touch was called 3 Dot. And this is ostensibly an Arduino-based board. I mean, it has an ATmega32U4 chip in it, which is the same one you find in the Arduino Leonardo and the Arduino Pro Micro, something that I've said many, many times over this show because it's the easiest way to let people know what that chip is. And this is a general-purpose robotics and servo board. This is one of the ones that was on Crowd Supply, and it was a pre-launch project. And back in the day, I would just say, hey, this is a pre-launch project. If you're interested, you can go back and look later. It wasn't until much later in the show's life that we started returning to these to see how the funding had gone and how much they were going to sell for when they were available. And so I thought, what would be a better thing to do than to actually go back to this campaign, which was way in the early days of the show, for what is a kind of amazing little board, and seeing if it is available. And in fact, it is. So the 3 Dot board, I'm not going to go through it in excruciating detail now because I already did that over 2 years ago. But in short, this is an Arduino programmable board that does everything you need to in one spot. It comes with this rechargeable battery. You can plug servos and motors directly into it. Arduino IDE programmable, and there's various kits that come with it. So you can use this with any of your own gear if you want, or you can buy one of their accessories kits, which has things like wheels and motors and servos. Where am I looking down here? There we go. Yes. So with geared motors and wheels and servos and things like that. We never went back to it earlier on to see how much they were selling them for. So the 3 Dot board itself, which includes the 600 milliamp hour rechargeable battery, ships for $49. And then they have the accessories kit for $30 and a shields kit for $60, and a chassis kit if you want to get a nice laser cut chassis for it as well. And this kind of pattern of looking at cool stuff on Crowd Supply and then going back to visit it later to see how it did is something that I thoroughly enjoy doing. And there are some fairly notable things that we've covered over the years on Crowd Supply. The Slime VR tracker, I remember very early on kind of saying that this is something that was completely alien to me because I don't have a VR headset, although I do know a lot of people who are very into VR chat. And I remember thinking at the time, and I may have even said it on the show when we covered it, that this could do incredibly well. And it turns out it has done astoundingly well. They've made over almost $2 million for Slime VR. If you are interested in this, by the way, this is a full body tracker. These are things that you can clip onto your body, and that will give you amazing movement. Like if you look at this, it is just astounding considering that this is the prototype version like that they put in before they released it, and you can see how close that tracking is. Anyway, moving swiftly on because I don't have much time. MNT reform is something that really hit the press and made massive waves in both camps. People saying this is amazing, completely open source, open hardware, privacy-focused laptop right down to the core of the chip itself. And the other people saying, you could buy a top-range laptop for this money because I think they were almost $2,000 or something, the original MNT reform, which isn't the point. If you want this, you want it for the fact that it is completely open source hardware. I could go into so many of these things that we've talked about over time, but I think the shortest thing to say would be discovering Crowd Supply has been an amazing thing for this show and a terrible thing for my wallet. Now, we've also tried to stay on top of things like hardware releases and software updates on the show, and just general news that affects the more maker end of the embedded industry, but also some stuff which is straight up things that only engineers would find interesting too. Finding that blend has been interesting, but it's always been fun to talk about new hardware. I mean, most recently we talked about the new NRF 7002, which is exciting because it has a Wi-Fi chip. It's the first Wi-Fi chip that Nordic had put out, but probably the biggest one while we've been doing the show has been the Pico. The release of the Raspberry Pi Pico was kind of amazing, and again it came at a time where shortages were really starting to bite, and even when it was first released and people hadn't really got the full grasp of how awesome the RP2040 was going to be, it was still quite a buzz. But that's not the only thing that we've covered over the years. There's quite a few hardware releases, and I thought it might be worth just quickly whipping through a few of those. So probably the first notable release that was happened during the Electromaker Show's run was the BBC Microbit version 2. But just before we look at it, this is a peak Electromaker chaotic background right here. I've just noticed quite how chaotic the background of this show used to be. Not to say that this isn't all that chaotic, but yes, this was when I had no space whatsoever and pretty much no desk space either. Hence my two little desk spaces being covered in everything I was working on all at once. Anyway, the Microbit version 2 was an update to the BBC Microbit, a chip put out in conjunction, unsurprisingly, originally with the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, and it is a Bluetooth Low Energy maker board for young people and for folks who are getting into hardware and software for the very first time. The beauty of it is it has a lot of stuff on board. So if I zoom back or forward slightly in this video, you can see the board itself had this amazing edge connector for a start. I always thought this was a wonderful idea. The edge connector had bigger parts, which are very easy to attach crocodile clips to for doing external circuitry stuff, but it had other parts of the edge connector as well, meaning that you could plug it into a carrier board for robotics or whatever. And on the other side as well, it had things like a speaker, it had an accelerometer, I think it had a little MEMS microphone as well, perhaps, and this on the front here, this LED matrix and 2 user buttons. But the other thing about it that was amazing is that you didn't need to know any programming at all to program it. It worked with Microsoft MakeCode, and if you're not familiar with MakeCode, it is absolutely amazing. If you want to learn about the microbit, there's a huge amount of tutorial material just here. And what with it being a BBC thing as well, there, if I remember correctly, there was some bespoke content made by Jodie Whittaker as Doctor Who. She is the outgoing Doctor Who actress, which was an adventure that you only went through with the Doctor Who character by using the microbit and making things you were inventing with the Doctor. Such a wonderful idea for learning things. There's always been a place in my heart for the microbit. Just I love the way that it works. I love the idea behind it, and still to this day I think it's the best absolute beginner level maker board if you want to get something for kids to get them interested in all of this kind of stuff and the hobby that we love. Now, there have been some fairly big Raspberry Pi releases during the run of the Electromaker Show as well. Now, we'll get onto the Raspberry Pi Pico in just a moment, but the Compute Module 4 was a big one. It was the first new hardware release. I think there'd been an 8GB variant of the Raspberry Pi 4 the year before, but this was a complete upgrade to the Compute Module series. It was a new form factor, and they were significantly more powerful. And I think when it first came out, the Compute Module 4 had something like 35 different configuration options. There was a huge amount of options. And the Compute Module 4 also became synonymous with shortages, because very quickly after it came out, you couldn't get one. By the way, more peak Electromaker chaos in the background, including the first episode featuring Mr. Heater when I realized just how brutally cold the attic was going to be in the winter. But the Compute Module 4 was interesting because it also spawned this sub idea of baseboards. That people were making third-party baseboards for the Compute Module because obviously the 8-pin connector on the bottom of it allowed 80-pin connector on the bottom of it allowed you to do a huge amount with it. So look, that's one of the module I/O boards that they were selling themselves, but there's a huge sub-market of people making these baseboards for the Compute Module 4. And then when they suddenly weren't available anywhere, there was people making Compute Module 4 type boards that fitted the form factor of the Compute Module 4, so you could put them into the baseboards for the Compute Module 4s that you then could no longer get. It was a really interesting time, and I'm very glad that these shortages are starting to come to an end. But yes, so the Compute Module 4 was a massive release, as was the Pi Pico W2. And Pi 0 to W. I have a massive problem messing up Pi Pico and Pi 0. It's just two-syllable words. The Raspberry Pi 0 was a mind-blown moment for me as a general maker, as a person who was into computers and as a person who was starting to get into the idea of electronics, an amateur in every respect. I did grow up with computers, but I had my home computer, but I am exactly the right age where I grew up with a home computer that was fairly powerful, sure, but not crazy powerful. There was no broadband, there were no mobile phones, nobody had tablets, none of that stuff really existed or was widespread in any way. Then while I was a teenager, that's when things like broadband and mobile phones became a thing. So that when the maker movement landed and started to kind of hit hard, the original Raspberry Pi 0, which was given away free on the front of a magazine, was a computer that was 6 by 3 centimeters. And that was a mind-blowing moment for me. So I'm always going to have a little bit of a soft spot for the Raspberry Pi 0 and the Raspberry Pi 2. Did I say Pico again? Raspberry Pi 0. This is all Raspberry Pi 0. We're going to talk about the Pico in a moment. But to this day, I still feel like the Raspberry Pi 0 2W is one of the best bang for your buck things that you can buy if you are interested in computing and being a maker and electronics and all of it. It's $15 for a Linux computer that is, much significantly smaller than my hand. I don't know, what's 6 centimeters by 3 on my hand? Just that. Small. Very small. Small. Now, before we move on to the Pico, the Node MCU ESP32C3, which, by the way, came in the things are mysteriously dark time of the Electromaker Show. I mean, if you compare what it looks like now to what it looked like then, I have no idea why I made it so dark in here. I was learning how to do this. But there's been so many different variations of ESP32 released during the show that it's silly to try and cover many of them. But the ESP32C3 Node MCU board was a fairly notable one in that it was a super cheap Node MCU, so it's a familiar board. Anyone who's messed around with their ESP32 or ESP8266 for the first time usually had this sort of form factor board known as the Node MCU. And this was the first RISC-V board that was cheap and very widely available on a platform like ESP32 that people were familiar with, which is why I thought it was notable and worth mentioning. And to this day, I mean, this is still an incredible board, still incredibly cheap, still available. If you're interested in getting into RISC-V, this is a fantastic place to start. With all of the other ESP32 releases, it seems like a lot of variations on the same theme, and unless you're looking for a very specific thing for your project, you can get pretty much any ESP32. But yeah, this being a RISC-V one was sort of interesting. And now if you come to where we are now, the recently announced ESP32P4, which has no connectivity but is blisteringly fast and a RISC-V chip, RISC-V has really come of age. And as soon as there are development boards for the ESP32 available, P4 available, I'll definitely be getting one and featuring it on the show. Very excited about that MCU. Now, Arduino have also been busy while we've been putting this show out. They put out a bunch of the regular Arduino boards and a bunch of Arduino Pro boards as well. So the Potenta H7 famously was the STM32 board that they put out, which was just the most powerful Arduino to date, and is still just an incredible board for the money. And the Potenta X8, which they've just brought out, which is this wild Linux and MCU hybrid, by far the most powerful thing they have ever put out, and something that I would love to play with if I ever had the time. But these are aimed squarely at sort of the industry, and they're great for makers, but they're a bit more expensive. Whereas the Nicola Voice to me is one of the ones that just really sticks out as being unique. And yes, again, this is Arduino Pro. It's going to find its way into the industry. It's going to find its way into lots of professional use cases, but it's also just a wild idea. So it does voice recognition on the edge. So that means that you don't need to be connected to anything. I mean, it can connect via Bluetooth Low Energy to anything, but you don't need to be connected to anything to do voice recognition on the edge. It has an inertial measurement unit on it, so it can test movement, and using machine learning, it can test whether that movement is desirable or not. So, for example, there are a lot of wearables which are designed, in theory, to tell whether someone has fallen over or not. And using artificial intelligence is a way to make sure that you get that call right. You wouldn't want to get it wrong. If I remember correctly, they even have little screen drivers on here. So you have this tiny little lithium-ion battery, this low-power Bluetooth board which can do artificial intelligence on the edge, and you could even have it in your name tag. And so when you wanted to, it could recognize your name and send a message via Bluetooth Low Energy to, I don't know, another part of the shop that you work in, or your factory, or your smart home if you feel so inclined. The other board from Arduino that I really love is the RP2040 Connect. So this is using the same chip that's in the Pico. The RP2040 is Raspberry Pi Silicon, but long before the Raspberry Pi Pico W came out with wireless connectivity, this was the board that came out. It was announced like a day or two after the Pi Pico. And it was obviously a lot more. It's 25 euros compared to the €4 of the Pico, but you got wireless connectivity, you got a MEMS microphone, you got an inertial measurement unit, and it was Arduino IDE compatible, it was MicroPython compatible, and it was also CircuitPython compatible, courtesy of Liz Clark from Blizz City DIY, who ported the code over, which was this was pre her working at Adafruit. And those of you who may have heard me talking about a podcast that was recorded with Liz for Electromaker, that did get recorded and it was supposed to be released. We've had some technical issues on that, which hopefully I can get resolved, and if not, I'll ask her very nicely if we can chat again. I'm sure a lot of very exciting and interesting things have happened since she joined Adafruit, because the news was very fresh when I spoke to her before. Anyhow, there's so many other development boards I could talk about that were released during this time. I mean, there was the Latte Panda Delta, which we covered and did a lot of work on, which was an x86 single-board computer that was as powerful as many mini PCs, and I had lots of arguments with people online as to whether you should get a mini PC or not, and was educated softly in the fact that mini PCs are actually kind of awesome, and I am a convert. And there's been just untold numbers of other development boards from different companies who are all sort of just trying to get to this same point of cheap-ish hardware that isn't too hard to program to do anything that you want. And it still blows my mind that a few short years ago this was still seen as a niche thing. And now I can talk to it on the internet in such a way that people who aren't even necessarily interested in the hobby itself are watching it just purely just because it seems actually cool. However, probably the most exciting release the entire time I've been doing this show is the Raspberry Pi Pico. It was Raspberry Pi's first piece of silicon, the RP2040 chip in the middle of this board, and the Pico is the development board that came out with it. If you're watching this show, you probably know what this is. You probably played with one yourself. And the thing that amazed me is that it came out and pretty much overnight became one of the go-to development boards for a lot of makers. Obviously, there's the idea of something being new and everyone wanting to try it out. But if it wasn't good, people wouldn't still be using them to this day, and the RP2040 chip is showing up in a huge range of things, from hobby development boards to industrial kits to Eurorack synthesizers. They really are a loved chip. And there's a good reason for it. I mean, if you need something simple to get a prototype up and running quickly, MicroPython or CircuitPython, great way to do it. And you can just plug in, write your Python code, run it on the board, and yeah, it's very quick and it's easier to understand, what with it being Python. And there's a lot of modules that do what you want them to do straight out of the bag. If you want a bit more speed, or you need to get down to a slightly lower level, then the C and C++ SDK is fantastic, and it's documented wonderfully. And as I later found out, there's a reason for that, and that's Alistair Allen, who I interviewed for the Electromaker Show, who is the head of documentation. I'd love to chat to him again, actually, and we'll be talking about that interview later in the show. Now, around a year and a half later, the Raspberry Pi Pico W came out at only $6, which was incredibly cheap, and it added Wi-Fi to the RP2040 on the chip, or on the board already, which is what everyone expected. There was a bit of grumbling at the time that the Bluetooth wasn't working and that it couldn't work because of the way that they'd set the companion Infineon chip up, which turned out not to be true. And if we were doing a normal Electromaker show this week, we'd be talking about how Bluetooth has now come to the Pico W, because it has. Anyway, the Pico W was the same goodness, but with Wi-Fi. And as you probably just saw scrolling past there, it was also one of the earlier times that Robin showed up on the channel, who was the Electromaker Educator, the gadget guru, the person behind the Electromaker Educator videos and the new product of the week videos, which brings us neatly onto the giveaway of this particular, well, not the one in my hand, but a Raspberry Pi Pico that we started on last week's show. Now, the same Robin Mitchell, who is the Electromaker Educator, is hosting the Product of the Week videos. And I talked about this in last week's show. I'm not going to spend much time on it now. But essentially, we will be putting out not quite weekly videos called Product of the Week, confusingly, talking about amazing things. And we'll be talking about the latest Product of the Week soon. But last week when we talked about this, we said we're going to give away a Raspberry Pi Pico. And that's exactly what we're going to do right now. So the winner of the Raspberry Pi Pico competition that we started last week is HiFireX, who said in their comment, "I've been using the hashtag Pico since when it first came out. It introduced me to the ARM Cortex-M0 Plus architecture. They're now branching out to STM32CO, but they're also interested in these Puyo microcontrollers." Again, on last week's show, we were talking about those absurdly cheap 8-cent 32-bit microcontrollers that you could get. I think it's a good time to focus on these micros now that we have all of these options. Well, now you have yet another Pi Pico in your quiver, as it were. We'll be in touch with you, HiFireX, as how we can get this out to you. And yes, if you are interested in the Product of the Week, you can find a link to this week's Product of the Week in the description of this video. Let's move on to talk about that right now. So this week's Product of the Week is the Argon One M2 case for the Raspberry Pi 4. Now, I'll be the first to admit I was a little cynical when I heard that we were going to be featuring a case as the Product of the Week, because it's just a case, right? I mean, you know, there's Raspberry Pi cases you can print yourself, there's a million of them, but it turns out that this is actually something quite special. So it takes all the ports from the Raspberry Pi and puts them on the one side of the case. So far that isn't particularly special, but this is a full aluminium case that takes care of heat dissipation, that takes care of all of the power requirements, and has an M2 slot for a hard drive, all built into the case itself. So this is much more than just a case. It expands what a Raspberry Pi 4 can do. And again, an aluminium case that's designed to be semi-rugged. I mean, this isn't IP6768. You're not going to be able to dunk this. You don't want to put this in a super dusty environment, but it's a hell of a lot more protection than most other Raspberry Pi cases give. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time chatting about it now, because what I'd love you to do is head to the link in the description and go and watch Robin's video on this, and also read the blog article about it. And as with all of the other ones, we're going to be giving the Argon One M2 away. However, there's a bit of a twist. This is our 100th episode after all, so we are giving away the Argon One M2 case. We're also giving away just this little list of things. Yes, since this is the 100th show, we wanted to do something a little bit special. So if you enter this competition, you will win the Argon One M2 Raspberry Pi 4 case, but you're also going to win just a couple of other things. So, for example, the NRF7002DK. This is the development kit for Nordic's new Wi-Fi chip. It is a Wi-Fi IC. There's also a Bluetooth Low Energy chip on it too. You'll also be winning a Raspberry Pi Pico, because I've talked enough about how much I love this board. We're going to give one of these away this week. There's also the ESP32 variant of the Siege Studio Zhao. These are the beautiful, tiny little development kits that Seed Studio have been putting out. USB-C, and this is the ESP32C3 variation. So as I was talking about earlier, it was very exciting when they first released these. This is the RISC-V ESP32C3 I was talking about earlier in the show. Now, this one is kind of special. This is one of the limited edition Arduino Uno Minis that came out a while ago to celebrate, I think it was 10 or was it 20? I don't know how many years. This says... A little jewel to say big thank you for all of your loyal support over the years. This is number CH12. I don't know exactly what that means. However, you will be winning this. And this is a completely pristine one. When these came out, I thought, okay, it's worth getting a couple of them for the Electromaker Show. This one had not been touched or indeed opened until right now when I opened it to show you this. And I'm going to close that again right now. It still has all the covers on the GPIO pins. I love these little Uno Minis. My one is just over here. I even didn't take this out the box to take a photo of it for the photo for these prizes. I got my own one out for that. Yes, so we're going to put that in the box as well. So, on top of the Uno Mini, the Pi Pico, the NRF7002, and the Seed Studio Xiao ESP32C3, you'll also win a Thingy 91. You'll also win an Intel Neural Compute Stick 2. This is Intel's AI thing that allows you to plug in via USB and do machine learning on pretty much any device, including quite low-powered older Raspberry Pis and stuff like that. And the final prize in the crazy prize box for this week is this ink plate, which if you're not familiar with it is an e-ink display with 3 capacitive touch buttons on the front, but if you look at the back of it, it is also a development board. That is an ESP32 chip. There's a micro SD slot just here, and a few other bits as well. Inkplate make absolutely wonderful things. We covered the Inkplate 2 recently on the show, which is their miniaturized version of it, and yes, this will be in the same prize box. So, with all of that stuff to win this week, you're probably wondering how to enter. Well, it's the same as pretty much every competition we've ever run. Now, over the time the show's been running, Electromaker have done a variety of different types of contests. When the Electromaker Show on YouTube first began, I had a mystery box of hardware from Mauser Electronics. The guys over there send a big box of stuff to just give away at random, which is exactly what we did. I didn't even know what was in it myself. I just reach in, take something out, and give it to someone from the comments of the previous week's show. But there's also been some formal contests on Electromaker as well. I mean, under the contests tab of the Electromaker website, you can see the various contests that we've run, where you would be sent hardware in order to realize an idea and then enter that hardware into a competition. And yeah, there's been various contests of those types over the years. But the most regular contest that we've been running is quite simply one that just requires people to watch the videos and put something in the comment section. And if you'd like to win all of the stuff that I've just told you about, the Inkplate, the Arduino, the Nordic case, the Nordic development kit, and the Argon 1 M2 Raspberry Pi 4 case, you need to do the same things we do in most shows. You need to be subscribed to this channel, the Electromaker YouTube channel. You need to go down to the comment section below and say what you would do with this huge box of maker and embedded kit that we would be sending you if you win, and you need to put the hashtag EM100. So EM for Electromaker, EM100 in your comment. And yes, we will be going through all of the comments that have that hashtag, and we'll be choosing a winner at random on the next show that we put up next week. This is a wild bundle of things that we are giving away today, and I'm really happy to do so. It's nice to celebrate the 100th show this way. Thank you all so much for sticking with us. As mentioned at the very start of this section, if you are interested in finding out a little bit more, you can head to the link in the description to find the product of the week and find out more about the Argon 1 case. Now, the Electromaker Show definitely began as just me in an attic with a computer and a camera, but it quickly blossomed into something that allowed us to actually go out into the world to events that were relevant to the show. Probably one of the more notable ones was Maker Faire in Rome. We were lucky enough to go to Maker Faire in Rome in 2022 and cover the entire conference. And it was amazing. It really was. There was some highlights where the One Love Machine rock band, or the One Love Machine band it's called, which is this incredible MIDI-controlled, pneumatic-powered metal band that moves around and plays this insane clanking music, as you may expect, and the robots are the ones that are actually playing that music. It's kind of wild. If I turn this on for a second, you can hear it. And yeah, it was an incredible thing to see, and strangely enough, having spoke to Kolja and interviewed him there, he lives here in Berlin, around 20 minutes up the road. I just had no idea. And this is just one of many, many things that we saw there that were just incredible. A concrete 3D printer that can build houses, for example. And of course, Raspberry Pi were there as well. This was amazing. Michaela's smart glove was something that I just thought was wonderful. She's made this thing where you can go through registers of keys by using your thumb, and then then use the flex sensors on your fingers to type. The idea being that you don't necessarily need to stand at a keyboard. People that maybe only have, that have difficulty with movement can maybe use it. It's just one of the many things. You wander around at Maker Fairs and it's just all of these wonderful ideas sitting at every table. Anyway, I got slightly distracted there. Maker Faire Rome was absolutely wonderful, really enjoyed being there. Raspberry Pi were there, of course, but we also had the opportunity to go to Embedded World a little earlier, and Embedded World also was kind of amazing because that was the first major tech conference I ever went to for embedded devices. I've been to lots of conferences in the past for consumer electronics and things, but it was wild to go and see what the actual industry targeting engineers were putting on show on the conference floor. And this is me riding a fitness bike that had been turned into a smart fitness bike, getting a little bit more tired than I probably should have done. It was a little embarrassing. Now, one of the things that I felt very lucky to be able to do was interview Eben Upton, who is the CEO of Raspberry Pi. We managed to speak to him just a day or two after the Raspberry Pi Pico W was released, and it was just a genuinely nice conversation. I'm not much of an interviewer. I tried to kind of say I just want to sort of have a chat, but obviously there were some questions that I needed to ask and make it sort of a more formal interview. But he was very gracious with his time and made me feel very comfortable. In fact, not only did he agree to have an interview with us, the time schedule for the interview was where he was going between one thing and another. Being a CEO, he's rather busy, and yet he realized that the situation that he was in wouldn't have given very good audio quality and reschedule his day so that he could nip home and give the interview from there. Just a thoroughly lovely gesture on his part. And if you'd like to see that interview, I'll leave it in the description of this video. As well as speaking to Eben, the CEO, I also got the chance to speak to Alistair Allen, who is the head of documentation at Raspberry Pi. And Alistair's a really interesting person. He's a funny guy, but his philosophy of documentation is something that I absolutely adore. The idea that documentation in and of itself has to be have a sort of teaching element to it. There has to be a narrative to it, because if it's too dry, you're not going to be able to follow it, but it still has to have all the technical details in it. And yeah, I mean, Alistair was an astrophysicist who started using Raspberry Pis in order to automate it and got way too into that, and now he's the head of documentation at Raspberry Pi. Very interesting dude indeed. And again, these are two people that I would never have thought I would have had the opportunity to speak to if it wasn't for this show. I'm very glad about that. I'm very glad that our show has got to the point where this works. I'm really looking forward to giving more long-form interviews like this in the future when I have the opportunity to do so. As I may have mentioned earlier in the show, we also interviewed Blitz City DIY, Liz Clark, but there was technical issues with that recording, which unfortunately have led to it being massively delayed. Maybe we'll have to re-record that. We also were very lucky to have a moment to chat with Massimo Banzi, who is one of the leaders of Arduino, who was also at Maker Faire Rome, when they announced the sound shield for the Arduino Uno, which is the Make Your Uno kit. It's an Uno which is deconstructed, which you can put together and you can solder it yourself, and it also has a shield on top for a little speaker and some different potentiometers, so you can run a synthesizer, maybe using the Mozzie library, I can't quite remember. And yeah, we had the opportunity to just have a quick chat with him at Maker Faire Rome. He was a very lovely guy, someone again I'd very much like to speak to in a much longer form in the future. If you're interested in any one of these things, just take a quick look in the description below. And we will be doing the same this year. We are at very least planning to go out to Maker Faire Rome. We'll be at Embedded World, which is earlier this year. It's in March, so that'll be coming up quite soon. And going to physical events and doing this stuff has been something I never thought I would do, but I'm very glad that I am. And it's one of the parts of the Electromaker Show that I'd love to kind of put into the regular show more often. We've done these roundups, but I'm hoping maybe this time I can do an Electromaker Show specifically filmed from the floor of a conference, and all of the things we feature in the show, all of the sections will be things from the conference. Who knows? It's an idea. So that was it. That was our 100th episode of the Electromaker Show. This is our 100th podcast. Actually, it's our 102nd or 3rd podcast, because there's been other special podcasts, including those interviews with Eben Upton and Alistair Allen, as were mentioned in the show. And there shall be more podcasts coming. As I've said so many times, I've wanted to expand the podcast on the show for a while. Those plans are definitely still in place, but as I started to put interviews together last year, we had a technical problem on one, and just scheduling was a bit of a nightmare, just trying to actually work out how we could talk to everybody and fit it into the regular day-to-day, because I wear several hats at Electromaker, and interviews take the time to organize. But they will be coming, and there's a few notable makers on YouTube and online who have all said they would be interested in chatting to me at some point, so that is still something that will be happening. Anyway, I can make promises about podcasts all I like, but really what I should be saying is thank you all so much for listening to this show, for sticking with us for a full 100 episodes. I'm very much looking forward to making the next 100, and I hope you have a fun, safe, and creative week. I will chat to you soon.